In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can take our proxy model pieces and start to up-res those so they become pieces that we can push into ZBrush and start as a sculptural piece that we're either going to use for subdivision levels or for Dynamesh. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're inside of Maya, and I'm actually using the 04_proxy Canon ground ferns grass file. And one thing I wanted to kind of show you about this, if we take a look at the Canon, if we select the whole group here under Geo, and we open up UV, we're in the modeling section right here. We go to UVs and go to UV editor, and we've got this. You might have this thing kind of pop out on you. Just let's go ahead and click and drag this right into here with this blue bar and dock it. And I'm going to hold down Alt and middle mouse and left mouse drag to zoom in. And so you can see I've already got the UVs kind of packed and everything. We've looked at how to set up UVs in a previous video. I think the only thing new that I kind of learned about this is if we select all the UVs under Arrange and Layout, there's this Orient Shells, and that kind of straightens everything up. So I think that's the only thing that's different about mine, and I've kind of maybe gone here and rearranged a few things. I did right click on here and say UV Shell, and you can select this. This does make it a little bit easier for you to grab some of the shells and kind of move them around. So what I'm suggesting is that you set up UVs first before you do this up-resing process, because it's a little bit easier to work on this lower res geo, set up UVs for it, and if you up-res it, it's going to retain a lot of the UV information that you have on here. And so I'm just going to move this guy a little bit, and we should have just a little breathing room on this here, like that. But yeah, so the UVs that you have are actually going to hold for the next stage up. So I'm going to show you two different methods for up-resing, and one is just adding support edges, and then the other one is going to be using the crease tools that exist within inside of Maya. So the other thing I want to make sure that you do is that you hold the geo that you have. So we can use this as our game res geo in a little bit later stage, but if we get rid of it, it's gone and we don't have it. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that, and I'm just going to duplicate this template. And if we duplicate with Control D, that will duplicate. You can find that under Edit and Duplicate right there. I'm going to rename this group to upres like this. I'm going to take the template group and I'm going to hide it. So we can hit Control H to hide it. We can go to Display, Hide, Show, and we can hide selection, or we can show selections, and there's the hotkeys for that. So let's go ahead and hide this selection for the first one for the template, and then we're just basically holding all that geo. I'm only going to work on the Canon right now, so we don't need to see the plants or the ground. So I'm going to select those. I'm going to select this one, hold down Control and select that. And I'm going to hit Control H to hide. And so here we are with just the Canon. If we tap 5, we're going to just look at this with just the lighting, the default lighting alone. And if you tap 7, I've already set up some lights in here. So depending on what you want to look at for that, I do have screen space ambient occlusion on, and we'll go ahead and turn on wireframe on shaded. And so the first part that we'll go ahead and take a look at is this part of the Canon. So I just select it, hit F8, and we can do an isolate select. So that exists within up here in the menu. So we can isolate select there. We can go to show, isolate select, and do view selected. There's that in the menu, and you can hit Control 1 or Control I. Sometimes I'm not sure, it looks like, or Shift I, I'm sorry. Shift I. So if we do Control 1 to bring everything back, and try Shift I. Sometimes some of these hotkeys work for me, and sometimes they don't. So sometimes it gets just a little bit frustrating. If it doesn't work for you, just go ahead and use this as the option, or use Show, Isolate, View Selected. That always seems to work in the interface, and I never have any problems with this. So the goal is, if I select this and I tap 3, this is the Smooth Mesh Preview version of that. And you might actually like the shape of that, but that's not exactly what I'm going for. I'm going for something that feels a bit more like this base cage that you see here. So we have this ability with the multi-cut tool to add additional edges, and these will be what we consider our support edges. So if I shift right click on the object when it's in object mode, and you can see it's green like that, we can get to this through the marking menu through the multi-cut tool. And it's real easy with the multi-cut tool to hold down Control, and then you can drag and you can add a new edge loop in through there. If you hold down shift while you drag, it's going to drag into incremental slices for this polygon that you're working on here. So I want to get really kind of close to this. Depending on how close I get, that's how tight the kind of support for that edge is going to be. So if I added a support edge here and here, and then I tap 3, you can see how that's going to be holding this edge a lot tighter than like what we got going over here. Now, the way that we created this, I'm going to hit undo to get back to this. The way we created this was using the bevel tool, and we beveled to make sure we had equal distance on there. Now, if you want to have equal distance on some of this stuff, this is pretty easy to do this on this. So I'll just hold down shift and I'll keep double clicking on these edges to do edge loops like this. And I'll keep adding until I get all the pieces here like this. And then now I'm going to shift right click and use the bevel edge. So I'll just do bevel, and I'll change the fraction down to 0.1, and that'll tighten it up. That might be a little bit too much, so I'll do 0.2 at least. And now when we tap 3 on this model, you can see how we're holding those edges quite a bit more. I really like the fact that these have these kind of like crisp points within here. So if I double click this, hold down shift, double click right on here, we'll do the same thing on this. We'll shift right click and we'll bevel the edge on that, put the fraction down on that one to maybe 0.1, and you can do segments. If I do 2, you can see it's going to put a split down the center of that. If we do something like 5, we got a bunch more. I think if we just put 2, I think we should be pretty good on that. So I'll tap 3 for that, and you can see how that's starting to hold that edge there and starting to make it feel a bit more hard edge. The other thing that I did on this, let me turn off wireframe unshaded so we can just check the model quality of what's going on here. If you select the model and delete history, Alt-Shift-D, and hit Control-A, bring up the attribute editor. If we take a look at the material that I put on here, I assigned a blend to this. So it's real easy. You select it, right-click, say Assign New Material, and then that's going to give you a whole list of materials that you can make. Just made a blend material. But after that's done, I take the white spectrum of the specular, and I kind of just push that up just a little bit like that, and have just a little bit more specular on there. You can play around with the specular roll off and the eccentricity. So if I drag this to the right, you can see it makes a much broader kind of highlight on here, and this kind of dulls the highlight on there or makes it a little bit more intense. So I'll probably be like right in this area, right in through here. And you can see the specular rolls off that really nice. So we can kind of check the model quality of what's going on here a lot better. So I'm going to tap 1 here, and again, we can use the modeling toolkit to get to the multi-cut tool, or we can be in object mode, shift right click to get there. So however you feel comfortable getting to that tool. I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to add support edge here. I'm going to add one here. I'm going to add a support edge here and here. And I kind of like this crease that's going on here, so I'm going to hold one here, here. And on the inner part, I'm going to add one right about here. And sometimes it gets a little confused as to where you want to go. So I'm just dragging from that edge. I'm going to do one more right after that to make that a little bit tighter. So I'll tap 3, and you can see the results that I get inside of that, like this. And I think I would just want to add maybe a support edge along the back part of this right through here. So tap 3 for that, and then let's just deselect our model and hit F8 and select off the model, just so we can see this is purely what we're getting for the modeling quality of this. Now, depending on what you want to do with the design, I might actually want to hold this as a more kind of like hard edge in through here. And so again, it's all about using maybe the multi-cut tool or the bevel tool on some of this stuff to try to hold particular edges. So I'll double up on that and tap 3, and you can see maybe that makes that just a little bit tighter and through there. So I'll tap F8 and deselect the model. You saw when I added that edge, you can see how it starts to build a little bit of a crease there. And again, maybe that's what you want. Maybe you want that to be a little bit little bit softer transition, you know. We also have the ability to maybe do some detail work on here. So let's say I made some kind of loop like this and I hit F10 for this edge. If I hit the, let's see, sometimes it's the up arrow key. Let's see, which key is it going to be? I actually hit the down arrow key and it did an edge ring for us. So I always get a little bit confused as to what is going to actually select this. These are the arrow keys that's to the right of the shift and control on the right side of the keyboard. One way that I know that we can get to that is if we select this edge and we want to do a ring, we can hold down control and right click and say to edge ring utilities and say to edge ring. And at that point, if I want to extrude these in, I want faces. So I'm going to convert this to faces. They're edges right now. So I can hold down control and hit F11 and then I'll convert to faces. Now I can shift right click and say extrude face, and I'm going to do a thickness on here. So I'm going to hold down control as I click and drag on the word thickness to kind of pull this down just a little bit. So maybe I want some kind of detail like that. And if I want even thickness along all these things, I think it would probably make more sense to make and use a bevel. So I'm going to select these edges, double click on it, I'm going to hold down shift and get in a little bit closer and double click, shift, double click, shift, double click, and you can see I've got all those edge loops going all the way around. Now I can shift right click and do a bevel edge, and you can see with the fraction even set to 0.5, it's pretty tight in there because we've got geometry that's like so close to one another. So let's just hit F8, select off the model, and then tap 3 on it to see. And so you can see we've pretty quickly made some really nice detail cuts on there. So you could emulate that and kind of work your way around the rest of the model if you wanted. I'm just going to go ahead and probably leave it just like that. I might do a little bit more work inside of ZBrush, but I think that'll be pretty good for this shape that you see right here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring everything back, hit Control 1. So there's something about a cylinder shape. I think that one's pretty easy to kind of see and kind of understand. Let me go ahead and show you this object here. I think this one's a little bit more complex. So if I hit Control 1 or we just hit this button up here for the isolate select right here, we've got this shape at the very top that's pretty square. It's got Ngons on there right now, so that's not the greatest thing. We can go ahead and fix that up. But if I tap 3 for the smooth mesh preview, you can see how bad this geometry is currently in the condition that it sits. And so if I tap 1 for that, we could do this thing here where if we selected all the edges that we want to crease or bevel. First I'm going to show you beveling because you're kind of probably familiar with that with the last piece that we did. And so I'm just holding a shift, selecting these just like that. And then now that I've got all those pieces, those are the edges that I want to support and kind of hold. So I'll shift right click and I'll say bevel edge. And on this one, we've got a fraction of 0.5. We could leave it there, or we can maybe drop it down 0.4. And on this one, a segment, I put 2. So it's going to put a support down the middle, and it's going to do a little bit of rounding. Now if we select this and tap 3, you can see this is the object that we're going to get, and that doesn't look too bad. If we bring everything back, Control 1, or just go ahead and hit that button that's up here for that, right? You can see how we can start to take those pieces and those objects and we can up-res it. So that works. I wouldn't say the geometry is super clean, but what we can do is convert this. If we're going to push this into ZBrush and we have smooth mesh preview on any of our objects, we always want to convert this stuff over. So we want to take that and we're going to go modify, convert smooth mesh preview to polygons. And at that point, that gives you something in the channel box that you can see over here. Here's the channel box right here. And here's the poly smooth face. So we can drop that division down to 0. That's going to give us the base cage. If you do 1, then it's going to do a division, take each face and divide it 4 times. And then if we do 2, it's going to take that and double it even more. So you can see we're basically emulating what's going to happen in ZBrush for subdivision levels. So you could treat each one of these as subdivision levels within inside of ZBrush. What we'd want to do before we put it into ZBrush is probably at least have it at this level, and we can get a lot more predictable results that way. If we do 2, we can get away with that. So this would be the object as we would go ahead and push it inside of ZBrush like that. So I'm going to undo. Actually, I'm going to probably just leave this one. I can show you guys on the other side what this will look like with creasing. Okay, so I'll do the isolate select right here like that, and then this time we'll tap 3, and you can see we got the same problem. We'll tap 1, go back to that base cage, and if we hit F10 or we right click on here and say edge, and we select any edges, now if we shift right click, because we're using edges, it kind of knows that we want to do some more operations with edges. So I'm just going to drag down to crease tools. So again, shift right click, crease tool, and I'm going to go through like this, select all the edges that I want to crease like this, hold down shift and double click, and I think I got them all. So we'll tap 3 now, and then with this crease tool we can middle mouse drag left or right, and it's going to give us this crease value that we got. Now this the shading inside of this for the preview is just not all that great. So if we do this, if we go modify, convert smooth mesh preview to polygons, if we do that, and then we go to something like mesh display and soften our edges, we still get some shading that's just not all that great. We can go to soften harden edges, and we can set an angle for it. We'll set it to something like 30. And so that looks pretty good, but we just don't have any beveling going on for this. Now, if we tap 3 on this, it's going to take this and do the smooth mesh preview on top of where we're at currently with things. And that'll be fine. It's just know that we're getting like a pretty high poly count. Like you might even want to delete the history on this, Alt-Shift-D. And then now if we select it and tap 3, you can see we're starting to get some rounding on there. It just doesn't look all that great. I'm going to still go here, and I'm going to go to mesh display, soften all the edges on it, and then tap 3 and see what the results are. So it's doing a decent job. I'm not a super big fan of this. Let's see if we do this. I'm going to hit undo until we get back to where we had some options for the poly smooth, not poly smooth, the divisions for this. So I'm going to hit undo, and we got this division. So if I do this a little bit higher, kind of like this, I'm going to delete the history on it, and we're going to take this and then just go to mesh display, soften edge, and I'm going to tap 3 at this point, which is getting a little bit higher, but I'm just not a big fan of the shading quality. So when we actually push this into ZBrush though, we're going to be able to take this shape and just convert it over. So it's probably going to come in more looking like this. So if I just do the soften harden edges and do a threshold of 30, it's going to probably look like this. So this is a nice clean shape, and then when we turn it into Dynamesh, it'll probably soften the corners a little bit. And there's a technique that I can show you within there to kind of soften the corners anyway. So I know this doesn't look so great in Maya, but it's not going to look too terrible inside of ZBrush. Now this method that you see here is going to give you much more predictable results for exactly what the creasing is. I mean, like when you see it, what you see is what you get, kind of thing. So we could take something like this for a block and hit F10, shift right click, say bevel edge, and if we get some options that we know work for these blocks, like if I see this fraction and I say this is going to be 0.1 like this, and maybe you do a segment of 2, and if I tap 3 on that and we're getting some predictable results, let's remember those numbers, right? So we'll go back here, we'll shift right click, and actually we'll go to edges and shift right click and say bevel edge, and then this time we'll try to put the settings already on there, like 0.1 for this, and then the segments to 2, and we'll hit apply. And so you can see we've got this as an option. Let's go ahead and open this up. So now we can tap 3 for this, and you can see what we're getting. So I'll select the object, hit Control F10, that'll convert to edges. So we got this, Control F10, hit apply. And we've already got that set up for there. I just want to see if I can do this all at the same time, or if it's going to not like me. No, it did it. So we'll tap 3, and you can see we're up-resing those parts. Now when we get to something like a cylinder, it's a pretty similar thing, and again, it just matters how you want to double these things up, right? You can also see, like, it did change the shape quite a bit on these because they're really super long kind of polygons. So you might actually want to put at least a split through here and through here to kind of work with some of these things. So let's take a look at maybe what that looks like. So if I tap 1 on here to go to the base cage for this, if I do this tool, there is a tool that we can use that can do some even spacing on here. Mesh tools, and let's go to insert edge loop tool and do the option box for this. And if we do this one, we can do multiple edge loops and equal multiplier. And if we do something like 4, let's just go ahead and click and drag like that, and you can see it's going to add 4 splits for us on there. So I'll tap 1 on this one and just click and drag like that, hit enter. We can do the same thing on this one, like that. And maybe I do 4 this way, like that. And I'll put this on this object. And I'll tap 1 for that, hit enter. And we've already got it on that one. Okay, so we can delete history on all these two, select them. We can go F8 to go into object mode like this, and then just holding down shift to select them. Alt shift D will delete the history. Now if we tap 3 for everything, see, I'm just wondering if that's gonna help hold the shape just a little bit better. It will definitely make things a bit more predictable when we go to sculpt on it, if everything's kind of a little bit more even for the geometry, if you're going to use subdivision levels. Okay, so that's going to give us everything we need for like some square parts. We can take a look at this one real quick. The shape of it's not too crazy or anything, but we'll close that down. We'll go ahead and put this on the isolate select here, like that. And on this one, I think I'll just select all the edges on it. I don't want to hold edges for this and this and for this, but everything else I do. So this would be a case where the bevel technique kind of works rather well. Or you could just shift right click and crease. You could do that, right? So if I tap 3, it's gonna hold that shape. So that's one option. Or we could shift right click and say bevel edge, and we could use the options that we had before. Maybe you do 0.2. It's up to you, like how far out you want that rounding to kind of go. Now if we tap 3 on this model, let's select it and hit F8 and tap 3, and then we can see what it's going to look like there with the smooth mesh preview. So I'll tap 1 for that, and let's go ahead and maybe work on some shape like this. This one's a little bit more complex. So we'll tap 3 and see how it kind of rounds out like that. Let's go ahead and isolate it, and let's make that all by itself. Now for this one, we'll hit F10 and double click on these, holding down shift, and I think I want to hold those edges like that. Shift right click and say bevel edge. I'll tap 3, and you can see kind of what we're getting. I'll just select off the model. That looks pretty nice and clean. Now we do have some problem with this right here, where you can see that this blend, this is what I'm talking about. You can kind of see some wobble in the geometry. So let's try to do everything we can to convert these to quads. So I've been talking about like this pattern that you have and how many edges that you'd have on through here. And so like if I hold down shift and I select every other one of these like this and hit delete or backspace, we can get rid of them. And now if we tap 3 and we let it do its thing, you can see it cleans that up quite a bit. So be on the lookout for the possibility for patterns like this. Like this could actually be the top of maybe like a screw head or something else like that. So get familiar with that. Alt-Shift-D, always be deleting history. And let's go here. Now on this piece, we could probably just tap 3 for that one, and that one's going to be nice and clean. Only thing is if you wanted to put some detail in here, if you're going to shift right click and say multi-cut tool, and maybe you put something here and here. We've already looked at how we can do this. I just hit the down arrow key and I'm going to convert that to faces, Control F11, and then we can shift right click, say extrude, and then we'll just not offset, well, maybe just offset a little bit and pull the thickness in. And then now I can convert that to edges, Control F10. That's not exactly what I wanted. I don't want these edges selected. So I'll just double click on this edge loop, hold down shift, double click, hold down shift, double click, and then shift right click, bevel edge. And we're going to change this back to 1 and the fraction of 0.5. And now we'll tap 3. And you can see that looks pretty nice and clean for that. Let's take a look at this object right here, and let's do the isolate select part for that right here. And on this one, we could just select these edges like this, here and here. And again, we could shift right click, say crease. Again, when you get into ZBrush, this is not going to matter so much. It just looks really bad in here, right? So you can middle mouse drag that like that to the right and crease it. And I'm actually going to be more of a fan of seeing it like this, where if we tap 1, shift right click and say bevel edge, and then tap 3 for that, and kind of seeing it like that. And let's go out of here, Control 1. So we've done the barrel for that, and we've done these pieces. Now the only thing that might be a little bit difficult for you to deal with is the fact that we've got some Ngons, we've got some triangles on this one too, and then this one is actually, we could get rid of these right here like that, and that turns that into quads. And let's take a look at the front side versus the back side, what that looks like if you do 3 for this smooth mesh preview on it. Let's do this for this object and isolate select just that piece and tap F on it so we can take a look and spin around. So this is where we're going to get some of that bad shading. So we'll go ahead and hit F10, select this, this, and this to get rid of it. And again, we could do creasing. So we can shift right click, say crease tool, middle mouse drag to the right, and then we would need a crease here and here. And we would need these pieces. Just be careful you don't select anything that you don't want to. Middle mouse drag like that. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to select all these. Like that, and I'm going to shift right click and do bevel edge on that one, and we're just going to use the options that we had for that and bring everything back. So that's how we could finish out those shapes there. And this is where we're going to have to deal with maybe like an Ngon on here. So I want this to be the same on both sides. I'm going to do one side. I'm going to show you the mirror tool, and that works pretty well for me. So we could use the multi-cut tool. Remember, we can get into the modeling toolkit here. We can do the multi-cut tool, hold down Control, and just add a support edge here. Now if we tap 3, you can still see it's going to look pretty bad. We could double up on that, tap 3, and it's going to look better, but we still have some problems here with the Ngons that are on here. So if we select the face, and if we shift right click, we can extrude the face in, and we can offset it in. I'm holding down Control as I do this, and we'll build just a little bit of a loop on there. If you tap G for your last command and do an offset, we'll drag in about maybe here. Tap G again, do this offset, hold down Control, and then drag that in about there. Tap G again for my last command and offset and drag in. Now we can collapse this all down to one point. Shift right click and say merge faces to center, like that. And again, think about that pattern that we're using. I'm going to use this and hit delete. And now when we tap 3, we get a really nice kind of clean end here. I'm going to delete history, Alt-Shift-D, and then within here we got mesh and we got mirror, and we got the option box for that. Let's just see the options. I'm going to mirror this across the world axis, mirror it across X in the negative X direction. And then I'm also going to tell it to combine with the original. I'm going to merge the border vertices. I've got a merge threshold of custom and it's 0.001, so it's got to be sitting directly on top of one another. So that helps me kind of not have too many problems when it's merging. I'll just hit apply and you can see what it's done for us. It's taken the one side that we had and it merged it over. The only thing to be aware of, if we take a look at the UVs, because we mirrored this thing over, it's going to mirror the UVs like we'd expect, but it's going to have one side. You can see I've turned this display on for this, and it's going to show us what's kind of backwards on some of this for the UVs on that thing. So we can go to UV, double click this, and you might have to go to transform, and you would have to go to flip, like flip U, and then I would have to move those over at that point. Looks like both of them are the wrong way. You want them to be blue. So if I select one, the red one is the problem, and I can flip that. And once I do that, then everything should be good. I think this is just a display error on this. I'll tap 1 for that, and we'll take a look at this. In here, and it looks like it did kind of mess this thing up, so I might have to actually fix that. So on this, if we remember back to the UVs, I'm going to do a planar map. I'm just going to go from the Y direction like this, and I will cut these guys off right here, right there, and right here. So I know it kind of stinks that we're basically rebuilding some of this stuff, but it does happen. So I'll cut those, and I'll do a cut down the center of this, like this. So I'll just cut it, and then right click over here, say UVs. I'll select that. We will unfold it. I'll do the layout on it. And it's not liking us for some reason. Let's select F9, hit Control F10, and we'll grow this out, and hit Control F12 to select our UVs. And just because I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this, I'm going to select these as faces. So I'm going to hit F9, I'll tap 4, and I'll select this, and I'll select this end here. I'll convert these selections to faces, Control F10. I'm going to tap 1 for the base cage, 5 for shading, and I'm going to grow the selection out. That's Shift, and then it's the arrow key that's right next to the question mark on the keyboard, and that'll grow the selection out like that. And then now I'm going to do a planar map, but you can see this axis that I want to push it through for X. So UV, planar map, option box, X axis like this, and then we'll push this over. I'm going to double click on the UVs and separate these out, because I did a front side and a back side. This part is wrong, so we'll flip it. And let's try now to see if we unfold this, what happens? Nothing. If I lay it out, we can get something like this, and then if we orient the shells, we can get something like that. So I'm just going to take this. I know these are like, this is new information, so I'm just going to push it off the 0 to 1 page, and then I'll bring everything back. I'm going to delete history, Alt-Shift-D. We'll bring everything back visibility-wise. And we did have everything selected for the cannon, and then now you can see, like, I've got to fit it within kind of that hole there. So I'm going to push this, just scale it down like this. I might as well fit it right in here. And that did expose a problem for me for these two pieces right here. So this actually should be flipped. And maybe it's because they've got two on top of one another. And this flip, not that one. I'll push this over, and we need to flip this one. And then that's just maybe, like I said, kind of expose some problems that I need to address and kind of fix. So this is going to be something that you're going to encounter while you work. If you find problems with things, you're going to have to kind of deal with them and fix them as you progress through. And basically now at that point, I'm going to have to give myself some space. But this is kind of the other thing about this process, is like hoping that everything kind of holds for us as we set up our UVs at the beginning stages. And it can help, and sometimes it's just unavoidable, and you have to do some rework on things. So I'm just going to move these guys a little bit, so you can see like this piece here is kind of having some new issues that just were not there before. And might actually just, it's going to take some time to kind of take these and rearrange and respace to get all these to actually fit within here. Like this. And I wish it was not as time consuming. So I just held down Control and Shift to add to the selection in there. So I need to fit this and make a little bit more space within there, like that. So that's kind of how we can deal with this. There's really not any more shapes on here that are that much more complex than what we've done here. Obviously, you've got to do something very similar for the axle than what you've done right here for this part. And for these wheel parts, it's going to be, again, a pretty similar thing, where if we isolate just this part, and we do have a front and back, we could work with both the front and back at the same time. So I'll just hit F11, selected through the model, like that. So it selects both faces. Shift right click, say extrude face, and let's move this over here, and we can hold down Control and add an offset there. Tap G again for this. We'll pull this one down a little bit. Tap G again, so we can do another one. I'm going to pull down a little bit further like this. And I'll tap G one last time, pull this in, and then Shift right click, say merge faces to center. Actually can't do that for that one because I've got two selected on both sides. So I'll select one at a time, right click on here, say face, and Shift right click, merge faces to center. And I'll do the same thing for this back one, just select it and tap G. And then now we want to get rid of these edges. So we'll hit F10, so select this, every other one, like that, holding Shift, and hitting delete. We'll tap 3, and you can see the piece that we got now. Now, this is kind of rounding out a little bit more than what I'd like, so I'm going to use the multi-cut tool. I'll hold down Shift, and while I drag this, it should snap right in the middle, and I'm going to hold down Shift again towards the edges so I can get even distance on there for this. I'll tap 3 and take a look at that now. So let's bring everything back visibility wise, and you can see that's looking pretty good. and we can go through and we will finish out the entire cannon. Okay, so I'm going to name this real quick what this final file will be. So I'm going to give this like this, proxy cannon upres like this, and hit save as. And we'll save the file. So this is what we're going to do to kind of finish this thing out. Like I said, I got to kind of do the wheels and maybe these pieces here, and nothing is really that much more complex than anything that I've shown you. So it's just a matter of taking the time and finishing out the last few parts of those pieces.